The Great Commission, Jesus' commandment to make disciples of all nations. We find the Great Commission in all four Gospels and in the book of Acts. Let's take a closer look at the Great Commission. First of all, the Great Commission is not uniquely a New Testament idea. A mentor of mine, Dr. Howard Fulch, used to call it the Great Reminder, because God has always had a global kingdom vision. For example, in the first book of the Bible, Genesis chapter 1, the Lord said to Adam and Eve, "Be fruitful, multiply, and fill the earth. Rule over it and have dominion." You see, this passage is describing God's desire for man to extend His rule and His kingdom over the whole earth. We see it in God's promise to Abraham when He said, "Abram, in you all the families of the earth will be blessed." We see it again in Solomon's dedication of the temple when he said, "Let this be a house of prayer for all nations." Therefore, when we do see it in the Great Commission in the New Testament, it's a restoration and a fulfillment. You see, Jesus said in John 20, "As the Father has sent me, so send I you." And following the victory of the cross and the resurrection, He says, "All authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me. Go ye therefore." Secondly, who is the Great Commission addressed to? The Great Commission is the believer's commission. It's not just a commandment for a special category of believers that we call missionaries. It is the will of God for every Christian to be a Great Commission Christian. Now, we will each have different assignments within the commission, but we must all own this commission. It's our Great Commission. Next, let's look at the scope. The Great Commission is not just about world evangelization. Evangelism is a key part of the Great Commission, and I'm not taking anything away from that. But it's also about discipleship. Jesus said to make disciples of all nations, teaching them to obey everything I've commanded you. Furthermore, the Great Commission by necessity also includes church planting. You see, church planting is the biblical byproduct of disciple making. So there's discipleship and church planting in the Great Commission, but it also includes the transformation of societies. As redeemed men and women are salt and light, they're like a city set on a hill in whatever place that God has put them. Now, to understand what this transformational part of the commission entails, we need to look at the Lord's own description of His messianic ministry. We see this clearly when He read from the Isaiah scroll in Luke chapter 4. He said, "The Spirit of the Lord is upon me because He has anointed me to proclaim good news to the poor. He sent me to proclaim freedom to the prisoners and recovery of sight to the blind, to set the oppressed free, to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor." We see in this passage an upgrade of God's messianic promises. We see the Lord's kingdom vision for human flourishing on the earth. As believers, we're called to make a difference in society, in morality, in the marketplace, in government, in education, in media. Now, this difference making is part of being a world changer, and it's part of discipling nations. Matthew 24:14 also describes the Great Commission when it says, "And this gospel of the kingdom will be preached in the whole world as a witness to all nations." That word nations is ethne. And it says, "And then the end will come." The word nations that is used here in Matthew 24 and again in Matthew 28 is the word from which we get ethnic group or people group. So biblically speaking, the understanding of nations goes deeper than geopolitical nation states. A geopolitical nation state is something like the US or China or Nigeria or Vietnam. Those are geopolitical nation states. The biblical idea is that of a people group with a common language and culture. So a single country like China would have hundreds of these people groups. So Jesus tells us to reach each of these, every people group nation. That's the quantitative aspect of the commission. So again, we see in these verses a qualitative and quantitative aspect or dimension of the Great Commission. By qualitative, it means extending the rule of heaven on earth Just think of how Jesus taught his disciples to pray. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. I believe that God put unique glory in each ethne or people group, and that each nation is ordained by God to reveal certain features of his glory. You see, God promised in Habakkuk chapter 2, verse 14, that the whole earth will be filled with the knowledge of the glory of the Lord as the waters cover the sea. So in God's redemptive plan, he wants to restore not only individuals to relationship with him, but he wants to restore nations, to redeem his bride, the body of Christ in every nation, to reveal the glory of his kingdom. So that's the qualitative aspect of the Great Commission that goes beyond evangelism. However, there is also that quantitative aspect, and that is the all nations part. How many nations are there? There are 17,000 ethnic peoples in the world today, and 7,000 of those are unreached. That means these are people groups that don't have a church planting effort among them that's able to evangelize the entire group. So this is the unfinished task from a quantitative point of view. But you and I live in an exciting time in world history because we are the first generation, without exaggeration, the first generation in church history that has a full picture of where we are in finishing the task. We are able to quantify the unfinished task. To use the analogy of a foot race, we're the first generation that can see the finish line clearly. I was a missionary in 1995 when the researchers completed the first in-depth list of people groups and unreached people groups and made them available to the body of Christ. The body of Christ has the resources, both human and financial, to complete this commission in this generation. By most estimates, we have more than enough, as much as 20 times more than what we need. However, one of the biggest challenges we face is that we've only mobilized a small part of the body of Christ to actively engage in the Great Commission. Will you commit today to praying and working for the body to be more fully activated and engaged to finish the task?